Hello, everybody, and welcome to this month's webinar. My name is Noelle from Gravity Union, and today we are talking about bridging silos, empowering records management through information governance leadership. And with that, I will now pass it on to Jessica.
Thanks, Noelle. I'll take control. My name is Jessica. I am a M365 SharePoint and Purview consultant here at Gravity Union. I have a background in records management. I got my master's of archival studies from UBC. I'm also the secretary and events director with the Association of Records Managers and Administrators, ARMA, their Vancouver chapter. I have over 5 years of experience working with Microsoft products with particular specialty in SharePoint Purview, also a member of the Association of Canadian Archivists, and I've worked with a bunch of our municipal clients as well as some private sector, First Nations, and BC public bodies. So, without further ado, a little background on Gravity Union. We're a boutique consulting firm, which means that we really focus on specializing our deliverables to the background of our client, pulling, of course, from our diverse expertise. We serve a lot of different organizations across North America. Towards their digital transformation journey. So usually shifting their content from a file share into SharePoint, but many things in between, including a lot of strategy engagements. We have a bunch of very fun partners. We're a collaborator partner, as well as a variety of other ones that you see below there. All right, our agenda for today. Topic is records management through information governance. I'll begin with an overview and key terms, grounding our conversation in common records and information management challenges. Likely these will be familiar to us all, and it's just a good starting place, but stay with me if it's not the most exciting content. The next phase will be embedded records management. So this is a concept that we work with quite a few organizations on how to align records management with business goals to really get that adoption success. And then we'll get into an information governance steering committee, what its purpose is, tips for advocating, and characteristics of success that you would like from that process, not just for records management, but for the organization as a whole. We'll conclude with a summary of the key takeaways, and I'll leave some time for questions at the end. So again, if anything comes up as I'm talking, feel free to pop a question in the Q&A, and I am looking forward to answering it at the end. All right, overview and key terms. So I'll begin by discussing the role of information governance. There's a bunch of different concepts around information governance. So just to kind of set the tone for what I consider information governance and what the purpose of our conversation today is. Consider it as a strategic, cohesive data and records management initiative, ensuring compliance and accuracy for protected organizational knowledge. With that, a lot of the common challenges of poor information governance are content sprawl, so things that are stored in a variety of different types of locations, physical, electronic, different softwares within the digital and electronic records management sphere, and no centralized source of truth for that content. And a lack of governance structure overall. So who is responsible and what roles within the organization are in charge of making key strategic decisions for the content in each of those repositories. What this can look like is an overuse of OneDrive if you are already using Microsoft products, or if you're not, device storage, which is usually a black hole for a lot of content that might be lost when a user leaves the organization, as it's not further backed up in a shared space. As well, it might look like prolific creation of sites without strategic oversight. So again, when individuals leave an organization, this is often exacerbated. So sites lack a ownership structure, meaning that the individuals with permissions to control members and the site structure and content within can be lost. As well as just consistent structure of that, the layout of different libraries and folders, policies like retention, data loss prevention, a bunch of very helpful policies. As well, clear purpose. So we want to make sure that overall each site has a clear objective that is not necessarily duplicating something that is already in existence. So there is clear membership and content associated to that. Um, Sometimes sites can evolve over time and duplicate sites can pop up in various locations because users might not know that there's an existing site. Again, with that ownership issue, if somebody is left and that site is orphaned, it can be quite hard to detangle that. So then we're looking at complementary functions of information governance. It is quite a broad concept. It has a lot of different um, roles. So I think of it like a umbrella. It has elements of data management, records management, privacy and information security, cybersecurity, as well as legal compliance. Each of these have distinct goals and purposes unto themselves, but they ultimately complement each other and come together as part of this information governance spectrum. And where one unit succeeds, they all benefit. So, for example, cybersecurity benefits information protection and information security as well as legal compliance quite directly, but data management and records management are, of course, benefited as well. I also want to take some time to highlight the ARMA generally accepted record keeping principles. These are freely available and have just been updated last year. There's 7 main ones. So from the top, we have accountability, transparency, integrity, protection, compliance, availability, and retention. So while these, again, relate more to records management, you can see how they have benefits within cybersecurity, within legal compliance, all of those different elements of an overall information governance program. And then just to drill down a little bit and focus on what records management is in relation to all of those, we quite often see specifically for digital records, the concept of an EDRMS, which is an electronic document and records management system. So that is a way to apply retention classification to secure transitory as well as higher value information, the records that you want to maintain for an organization. So an EDRMS is what a records management program is often delivering under the information governance umbrella. Some challenges with this are aligning a collaborative EDRMS with purpose-built systems. So again, we often have very best-in-class purpose-built systems for contract management, payroll management, asset management. There's truly endless others. And so those you can often have working alongside an EDRMS without a clear governance structure. Again, that understanding of a source of truth, which repository has the accurate, up-to-date information and where the actual record is being stored. As well, we see a lot of databases come into play here that store and protect organizational data, running things like analytics and reports, and otherwise playing a key role in monitoring that organizational knowledge. So what this often looks like is there's no coordinated digital disposition. Often for that, you need to have an understanding of what repository is the true record and being able to accurately classify and maintain that, as well as heavy duplication of content across all of these different systems, as each of them maintain a piece of the picture. but might not integrate directly with the other ones. So then there's a need to sometimes duplicate parts of that information in order to keep everybody on the same page. I also wanted to highlight April's RIM month. Happy RIM month to all you records and information management professionals. I'm sure you are already in the midst of communication strategy or anything like that, but this is an opportunity for having increased awareness and communication within your organization around records management, but also keep in mind that kind of information governance element there. So you can start to highlight key training for end users beyond just that onboarding phase. Any changes and evolution within an EDRMS as you kind of build that out, as well communication on best practices. So highlighting those key tips and tricks that really make a difference in how an end user finds and searches for information and then maintains it. And then launching any new initiatives. So if you are at the start of your information governance and EDRMS journey, some key communication around what users can expect, where you're going, what those goals are strategically across the organization. So good information governance can help all of that. But I'm sure you've heard quite a bit already about RIM month. So this next phase is going to dive into the concept of embedded records management. So I've gone over what records management is at a high level, some of those key challenges, but ultimately, how are we trying to accurately apply records management onto our systems, whether or not you have a very well-governed EDRMS, or again, if you're starting that journey at the beginning. So the key thing is to ground yourself in the understanding that good records management improves day-to-day work. So it will benefit everybody. And at the end of the day, we're looking to structure this as a solid foundation to build off information governance. So we're not just benefiting and saving everybody within our organization a lot of time, but we are also helping them be more security compliance, legal compliance, housing that data correctly, and everything like that. So embedded, this concept invokes the idea that records management is not external. We're not adding anything in that is disrupting the process for the end user, but it is intrinsically built in and what we want to aim for with good records management. So we're connecting classification and retention in place in the line of sight where end users are already typically working, storing, and searching for their content. The ideal scenario is that this is not an extra effort of burden, but enforcing that beneficial structure. So although everyone bears responsibility for maintaining a good records management system by accurately filing their content in these correct locations. We need to meet people where they are at and help them use the existing processes, ways that they're already searching and storing their information so that it is as less disruptive as possible, because oftentimes the existing processes are serving them well. They have a purpose, and this is a way that we can help benefit the broader organization and information governance by just layering on our records management expertise. So with that, the core goal, the real business requirement for them is always going to be information availability. They're less concerned with retention, unfortunately for us all, but they're really concerned with making sure that their information is accurate, it's up to date, they can access it in a timely fashion at the touch of a button, intuitively, where they go to search and store information. But then the retention element comes in by cleaning up rot. So we're looking to target that redundant, obsolete, and trivial information that can trip users up and cause them to spend a lot of time looking for the most up-to-date content, or there's always a few moments of accidentally making key decisions or sending material that was not the most up-to-date version just because of that duplication and abstraction of where the true record is stored. As well, the key requirement is secure access from beginning of creation of the file to the end. So making sure that that information and organizational knowledge is always stored in line of sight of the end user, but also securely. So everybody has access at the time that they need to have access within the existing process, and it can be monitored that way. The key element here is that we are discouraging systems that are not monitored, like a personal desktop drive or any other locations that are not on our information governance radar. So we're trying to be as inclusive as possible and having the integrations where we need to, but it is a lot of clear communication on what content locations should be used at what times for the key record material. So I've mentioned this a couple times already, but that direct line of sight with the end user is really important. Our recommendation is to put the end user in the driver's seat. So they understand their requirements. They might differ slightly from what I've just highlighted. That's just the typical structure, but we want to really tie into their business use values. So the speed of reference for the end user, maybe we can take some inspiration from the traditional structure of file folder names and layer on our records management retention that way. What does good records management mean to them? It's findability, it's grouped by process, function, and audience. Classification and retention codes might not need to be as directly in front of them because often they don't have very intuitive information as much as we would hope it would. Might as well be scientific Latin names sometimes that are useful for the key technical personnel like yourselves, records management professionals, but for the end user, they're looking for their key reference material, not something under a classification code in the 100 series that they have to drill down and sort through. So we want to leverage the search function, keywords that they're already using, any structure that they're already using, and help them provide useful metadata that gives as much value to them as well as for retention. And then the retention component, we're not losing sight of that in this process at all. But again, we're highlighting the use of metadata here. So our recommendation is to kick off the required retention period using metadata triggers. The best triggers are, of course, ones that are built in and auto-populated. With SharePoint, this is the last modified and created columns. These will always have content in them. They're quite reliable. And in the case of the last modified, it can be quite helpful to include a reference point of when this content was last active, was last needed when somebody opened it and started to work on the document. That initial collaboration process is still ongoing. This is that gray area that can potentially take longer for some types of records than others. So using the last modified date can help you dynamically evolve that retention period to only apply when you need it to when that record is finalized. On contrast, the created date can be quite helpful when you want to secure that information from its beginning as soon as it touches that SharePoint library, and then kicking off the retention period from there. It's important to identify and maintain consistent practices from the start when working with automated retention in particular. So the same triggers should be reused across different business units that share a record classification. So for example, if we want to treat reference material in the records management business group as last modified and an additional 2 years from that point, we want to maintain that classification and retention period across all of the other reference material libraries in each of the other business units. Reference material comes up so often because we all have it. It's very important, but it is also one of the key problem childs. They are the most prone to redundant, obsolete, and trivial information tripping you up, obsolete template documents, job aids for legacy systems that no longer apply, these kind of things. Can make searching for the accurate information a lot more difficult. But on the other side, we want to make sure that they're easy to find and end users are always able to start their collaboration process of making the files from the correct repository at the beginning. So acknowledging that we are likely either currently talking about SharePoint, or a lot of you I know are looking at moving to SharePoint in the near future. It's all well and good what I've said in theory. How does this actually come together? We could, of course, go over this in like a 10-part series. There's so much to cover, but I just wanted to highlight a quick example here. So keeping with that reference idea, here we see the reference label is applied to all of the content within this library. So we're parsing it out already from the other internal audit investigation material housed in other libraries. But we're still allowing the end user to easily come into this location and create material from here, build on drafts, use old templates and that kind of thing whenever they need to. The retention label is tied to this content type. So you can see the content type column there is very creatively named reference material. And that is what I've included in my query for this auto apply retention policy. It's also tied to last modified date. In this example, you can see the retention label column on the far right-hand side is giving me the date and time when the system automatically classified this. I've also displayed the last modified and created columns. I was working within a relatively tight time frame here, so I only set the last modified date to kick in after 1 day. Just to kind of show you a quick example there. And then last, I wanted to highlight just under the title of the library for reference here, you see all documents. And then beside that, the highlighted one is SharePoint admin view. So here, that's the one that we're currently displaying with all of this extra information of the content type, the retention label, how it was applied, when it was applied. That is not necessarily information that the end user needs to worry about too much. We're structuring this library called reference, so it is intuitive for them, and they would likely just be using the all documents view. So we can hide these additional columns and just display the document name, the last modified date for them, and potentially other additional information that they need. But in this case, it's fairly straightforward. And then, of course, an example of how this can go awry, which, of course, is very easy to do, and likely this will look familiar to some already. Using traditional folders, quite often these can be nested quite a bit. To the point where you're running up to the character limit for a file within a SharePoint library. So we want to move away from that as much as possible, but still take information from it. So here, we're still within reference, and then we have a presentations folder at the bottom, which I've expanded just to kind of show some of the default folders that end users typically use of organizing presentations by year, as well as some by topic. So we have a folder for conference guides as well. This makes it a little bit more challenging to apply accurate retention to. In this case, because at least we have a reference material library, we can still tie it to that location, but potentially some of the documents in here would not need to stick around quite so long as they are, and these folders will persist even after the documents are deleted and cause confusion around, is this still where I should be putting my presentations? Do I need to create yet another folder? That kind of thing. We also see some that are specifying an audience. So here we have one for Sandy. To somebody that is just looking at this with fresh eyes, they've been newly onboarded to the team. They might not know who Sandy is. They might not intuitively understand the purpose of that folder. For context, Sandy is my cat. So likely she would just need, she wouldn't care too much about these documents, but for example purposes, um, yeah, it's not as obvious as it could be. So that's another opportunity just to have a flatter structure, allowing the end users to incorporate some metadata, maybe on the type of reference material. We can have a metadata column for presentation. We can have something that is sent to management, sent to executives, or presented to the rest of the staff at the organization, that kind of thing. All right, so I wanted to pause here just to get a sense of where everybody's at. Where are you in your embedded records management journey? Thank you, Noelle. She has just started the poll for you there. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to choose if some retention is manually applied within your organization already, so relying on end users or potentially those folder hierarchies. Or if retention is automatically applied, resulting in automatic classification and disposition. If you have a mixed approach, trialing some different ways to deal with both legacy content and anything going forward. Or let's be honest, is retention really that important? Or is this all just a futile effort and everybody's going to save things permanently regardless? For sure. Yeah, there could be many more options here. That is valid. If there is no retention, that is not the wrong answer by any means either. It's just where we can start from.
Jessica, it seems as though a lot of our audience answer is retention is manually applied. And following that is a mixed approach. So
Perfect. I might have biased the results there by not including a no retention, but yes, thank you for that. Of course, the correct response I was looking for is that every solstice we light a bonfire of all ex-employee data, which we're printing out from the digital copy, of course, you know, just to, this is the only way that we can accurately manage disposition. All right. Now that we're all within alignment on what records management is, how does an information governance steering committee fit in with that? So next I will be defining a recommended structure for that, going over some examples and the key success markers that we're looking for. So the overall purpose, a good steering committee are specifically instigated when there is some kind of heavy disruption taking place, when you need to involve a level of senior management in order to quickly navigate through evolving conditions. The steering committee can be quite a heavy term in this sense, but my response to that is transforming the way that people work, share, and store information can be quite disruptive, and it's important to navigate that with intent and with clear shared goals. So a great steering committee has a clear purpose that it is cross-departmental. So the involvement is breaking down those silos in between each of the business units that are the key stakeholders and making sure that you have clear communication between them. You're united around a shared goal that balances priorities for complementary functions for the entire organization. This means that everybody is aware of how each business unit's goal is going to be benefited from this digital transformation process. As well, there are defined roles and responsibilities that harness each department's expertise. So everybody is there for a reason, including senior management, and they are aware of both what they're getting out of it and what their responsibility is in order to see that through. There is also alignment on policies and procedures. So there's clear communication with everybody in the organization that reflect the overall direction of this digital transformation process. So with all that said, a steering committee might not be exactly what you need. So depending on the structure and maturity of your organization and your process in applying records management and using an EDRMS, you might not need a steering committee at this point. I think it's a good thing to have in place regardless, but a working group under a specific executive sponsor might be a better fit if you have a particularly small organization, or an inclusion into an existing committee can also serve this purpose if you already have quite a few committees already. So this is a example structure. You can see that there is roles that align with the purpose of this. So we want to have a consistent and successful digital transformation adoption. So that requires an executive sponsorship, usually in somebody as high level as you can get, as well as a segment of committee leadership that are chairing the committee and are the ultimate leaders there. There are core committee members. These are the key stakeholders, and we have suggested some of those departments that you might find these roles in, or the specific expertise that you're looking for in having a good digital transformation process. Again, this is something that you can take inspiration from if you don't have somebody within these key roles. A lot of times we're wearing multiple hats and multiple different roles. Just consider what org structure you already have and make sure that you have representation from each of the different stakeholders. It's also important to have some supporting roles and contributors, so communications, because a lot of this is based on good change management. You want to make sure that you have a connection onto the comms team so you can publish out those org-wide notices, training initiatives, anything like that. And then, of course, the training and development specialist. Again, if this is a role that your organization has, or just an understanding that this is a key deliverable of this process and should be governed by the steering committee. And then a project manager. They're incredibly useful just to keep everybody on track and support that overall adoption process. Like I said, there's usually some pushback that, do we need another committee? Oftentimes senior executives are kind of over it. Rarely do they enjoy more meetings and more responsibilities. So please just take this as inspiration, customize the structure and schedule of the committee to fit your organization's needs. You're based on your maturity, size, the level of adoption you already have of the system that you're trying to implement. But ultimately, our recommendation is to nominate representatives and leverage those lower level stakeholders when possible so that we're using the higher level executives when we need to officially have sponsorship to sign off on the policies and procedures. And if they need to meet higher resistance, if that happens, having to step in at that point, but not necessarily in the day-to-day work. Consider minimizing the meetings, but maximizing communication. So we don't want that trade-off of continuing to get tripped up by the silos in between each of the teams. We want to make sure that the communication channels are always open, and that ultimately the steering committee can dynamically respond to things like resistance and the evolution of requirements and different stakeholders there. So ultimately, we want to really make sure that we have broad representation from each business group and keep those channels open in between the milestones. So I do have some tips on making sure that we are aligning all of the different business units and ultimately building bridges, not silos. So the next couple slides are just going to go over how a typical use case and strategic goal alignment can be. So here we have a legal team. One of their main purposes is e-discovery. They want to be able to place content on hold when involved in a litigation to lock it down and protect it from further editing or tampering. Alongside that, the records and information management team is looking to classify records according to their function and purpose. Ultimately, a shared goal and a alignment between these two is to find authentic, complete, and verifiable information across the organization. So neither one can accurately deliver their purpose without being able to find that authentic, complete, and verifiable information, that true record, and have the confidence that that is all the information on that particular topic, and they have in records and information management world classify that. And next, I wanted to talk about privacy and IT. So the privacy team, one of their purposes is to protect information that has perceived identifiable information, including health and financial data. IT is focused on maintaining data systems with necessary access and structure, and their common goals and priorities are to navigate security risk with required access and protections. So again, neither team can really accurately deliver their responsibilities without being able to benefit from each other and have a secure understanding of who needs access to what particular types of content and ways of adding extra protection around sensitive information, including PII. Lastly, everybody else might be quite common, folks that you interact with on a regular basis, but I want to make this clear that we can find commonality with a beneficial shared goal within records and information, and ultimately information governance between any business units that we want. So here I'm highlighting a CEO or president's office, the very top of an organization, and HR. The CEO and president's office, one of their strategic objectives is, as an organization, they want to present a best-in-class service delivery so staff can complete their work accurately and in an efficient manner. The HR team, one of their, of course, many responsibilities is staff onboarding and offboarding, and they want to make sure that this is completed without impactful loss of institutional information when someone leaves or when someone starts a team and is trying to figure out where the important documents go. So ultimately, the commonality here is that staff have the tools and support they need to fulfill their tasks. And of course, this comes full circle to information governance is both sides cannot support staff without a clear digital content management tool and structured storage of organizational information. So thank you for sticking with me through a bit of a reach there, but ultimately this is something that you can consider your org chart, consider what some of the main purposes and responsibilities are for each team, even ones that you don't regularly work with. And usually there's some alignment there that good records and information management and ultimately information governance can benefit them. So conditions of success of a strong steering committee are the clear definition of roles and responsibilities for each. So once you've built those bridges, and aligned those strategic goals, you understand who is responsible for delivering what content, whether it's training, whether it's the actual implementation of the system, or strategic decisions around what is the correct repository, how long is retention for certain material, and all of that. It will also deliver well-defined policies and often a lot of supporting documentation. So here we want to make sure that the steering committee is the one that is in charge of passing policies that align with the strategic decisions that they're making, and then also facilitating that supporting documentation around the actual procedures and guidelines and reference material that the end users will need in order to navigate this evolving landscape and still understand that they have a shared responsibility there. The ultimate success criteria is the adoption of the new processes. So once we have the first two components, usually the third will follow. And then also you want to make sure that you're meeting the underlying goals for each team. So in records and information management, we're automating the retention and classification. There's an increased findability of accurate content, strategic and deliberate use of digital storage, securely accessible information. You can kind of extrapolate what business units I'm thinking of with each of these. And of course, there are many other strategic goals that might come into play depending on the scope and shape of your steering committee. I have some examples here. The first one is a RACI chart. So this is going to the first success factor of a clear roles and responsibilities matrix. RACI charts are quite popular and quite often used for this. It's not necessarily the correct answer, again, for your organization, but you can take some inspiration from this. So this one, you can see it is focused on specific records management program activities. Along the top, might be a bit small, but if you pop out this window, you can zoom in a little bit more. We have the records management team, we have the IT team, communications, senior management, all of the key personnel involved. And then along the left-hand side, you see all of the specific activities that are required for an accessible adoption. And then we also have some for an information privacy program at the bottom. Again, if you want something that is quite customized to your organization, you can start with this as an inspiration point or potentially hire Gravity Union, and we can help make one with you as well. My next example is a information governance framework. So this is how we are defining policies and procedures right from the high level strategic policies. The example here is an information and data policy, and then we have defined its purpose. And this is supported by a structure of directives. We have some examples there: directive on records management, directive on email management, emails are not records, directive on information security, and directive on digitization. Again, examples. And then these directives, while still high level and strategic, will support the overall information and data policy. The directives are in turn supported by the standards. So this is our kind of mid-level. This is where we're really identifying specific configuration requirements. So we're interpreting the goals of the directives and the policies and aligning that with the current structure, current systems that we're using, the specific ways that we're implementing that in order to support the end goal of the directives and policy. So here we have an enterprise metadata standard, a corporate system of record standard, transitory standard, what is not a record, an information sensitivity standard as well. The next level is guidelines. So these are more a how-to guide that can support and act as a job aid for anyone whose responsibility is to help implement the standards and directly interact with the system that we have in place. So some examples around those are guidelines for digitizing paper records, guideline for disposing of records, guideline for disposing of transitory information, and a final guideline for accessing records of value. The last level is services. So a suite of requestable services that are supporting all of the elements that we just laid out. So these might not be as common, but still a necessary action that you take from time to time in order to fulfill that information and data policy and the goals outlined there. Those examples. So with policies and procedures, always heavy component of enforcement. Success ultimately depends on the adoption, people following through, both on their responsibilities and also following these standards. Unfortunately, as much as we want to have eyes everywhere, it's important to acknowledge that we do rely on end users and we are changing the way that they work to an extent, despite them being in the driver's seat as much as possible and using their wisdom there. But having some enforcement understanding with your policies and procedures will help enforce that adoption. So consider the level that you want. It can give teeth to the adoption of the goals, some potential internal disciplinary actions due to noncompliance or repeated offenses, and outline some clear ramifications for the rest of your organization. These are important because good information governance helps prevent lawsuits, investigations, fines, which are oftentimes very costly and apply regardless of whether your organization is private sector or public sector. And there's this kind of baseline understanding that the longer end users are misclassifying information, duplicating information, or not accurately being able to find the content that they need, you're losing time, which also has a cost estimate associated to it. It's hard to really put a tangible value on that, of course, but at the end of the day, people aren't working quite as effectively as they could be. So I wanted to conclude on a bit of a positive note. I was watching the Artemis 2 mission, as I'm sure a lot of us around the world were. And one thing that the astronaut Christina Koff ended on in the post-mission press conference was that she had been asked what the elements of a crew are and what are the criteria for a crew versus just working in a team, being an employee. What does that really mean? And going into this, before she went up in space and did the whole mission, she thought she had a very firm understanding of that. But when she got into space, looking at planet Earth, she realized we are a crew all together. And this was just a really fun message that I think ties in well here. So know from our astronaut friends, regardless of where you are in the world, we're all driven towards a shared goal and we're ultimately in the same boat. So our success both benefits each other and we're relying on each other. Digital transformation projects are often similar. So a good information governance program will benefit all and will be a lot of work in the meantime, but you know, it's a worthy pursuit regardless. So to conclude, some key takeaways that I want to give you and leave you with today are that message that we're in the same boat. You can take that forward to your organization and think about those alignments, the bridges that you can build within your teams. Our shared outcome is often just working more effectively and how we can best do so. As well, strong embedded records management benefits everyone, from executives to general staff, and is a core element of a good information governance program. All right. That leaves us with the Q&A period.
Thank you, Jessica, for the session. I'm sure our audience learned a lot. I know I did. Now it's time for the Q&A. So anybody feel free to drop your questions in the chat or in the Q&A portion. I just want to start, Jessica, with this question we got here from slide 33. She said, emails aren't records, exclamation point and a question mark. Say more. Yes.
Yeah, I would love to say more. I could wax poetic on this topic for quite some time. This is supported by the understanding that a record has a complete information bundle. So the fine print is, of course, sometimes emails can be records, but how we work on classifying that and storing that information cannot be done within an email inbox. Specifically talking about SharePoint and Microsoft, we can apply a retention policy onto content within an entire email inbox. This might be useful in the case of a senior executive when you want to flag everything as a kind of baseline. We want to keep this for this amount of time and not delete any emails just because likely they're important if they're going to a senior executive member. However, you can't accurately classify emails in this manner. So a good record is tied to its purpose, its overall process within an organization, what audience it's pointed to, and all of this requires a lot more manual information that isn't necessarily tied in the email itself. So if you don't have a good naming convention for a subject line on an email or how to draft the recipients and that kind of thing, oftentimes you're losing some of the context there. The email is just a small part of the picture. Or it might just be capturing some transactional information. So you're asking for a signature, but the document itself, that final PDF, is the true record and will contain that signature. And the email itself is transitory transactional information.
Awesome. Thank you. We have another question that just popped in on slide 26. Which roles within an organization tend to chair or co-chair?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. Ultimately, it could be anyone, depending on your organization structure. You want to have the executive sponsor be as high level as you can, because at the end of the day, this does affect everybody and you need that real firm buy-in and sponsorship from the executive level. But the chair and the co-chair can be a little bit more functional. So if the organization and you're the one really championing this as the records management personnel, that is absolutely a role. It can be any one of these key stakeholder members. And is an opportunity to kind of, again, build that bridge and say, this is a key responsibility of your department, be it legal or IT, and you are a very important person to kind of see the organization success of this process. But of course, keep in mind you want this person to be accountable and willing to attend many meetings as possible and keep those communication channels, bear some of that responsibility. So somebody that is willing to take that on at the end of the day is probably going to be the most successful candidate.
I'm just really curious, do you have any advice for managing files that have different retention periods or that a business group works on together?
Yeah, oftentimes we'll see conflicting retention. So going back to this example, one of the reasons why we've pulled out the reference material in particular is because we're tying a very specific shorter retention period to it than the actual audit investigations for this team. So the best case scenario is to have a consistent site structure where you're dividing libraries by a retention period and a classification, but also putting the end user's requirements in line of sight at the end of the day. So making sure that the library names reflect content that they're used to working with and they're looking for and have meaning to them. But then you are classifying that in the background with one retention per library.
Oh, thank you. We have two more questions, Jessica. So, how do you recommend we make it clear for IT, for instance, that our standards or policies should work with theirs? I find there is a resistance, feeling like our legislation and regulations are trying to override the standards they've established. So, it's almost a non-starter when things get brought up, and when it does go through, it's rather painful. So, what approach would you take for showing them that it's about harmony?
Yeah, um, IT. They are they can be the problem child for sure. It's a great question. There's going to be a lot of finesse and strategic alignment that you'll likely need to take on in those scenarios, especially if there is some bad blood of feeling like somebody has taken overstep their boundaries of what their role and responsibility is in the past and passing certain policies and procedures that appear that they align more with one side than the other. You'll need to address that. Um, it's not necessarily the responsibility of the records management person. Like, again, if you have a steering committee in place, this is a key component of that is making sure that everybody does have a voice and their voice is heard. And then the ultimate decision is made by the collective steering committee as a whole with their specific expertise in place. So I hear you for sure. I've seen a lot where in the past it's been one side versus the other, and it's really hard to break out of that model when essentially these battle lines have already been firmly entrenched. But as much as you can do to kind of just remind them of the shared goals that you have. So with RM and IT, that can often look like making sure that the data is in the right place, making sure that those protection policies are accurate and up to date. You can remind them that you're not trying to increase their storage costs, you're actually trying to delete content in a defensible way, which will ultimately benefit their costing as well. So yeah, um, you have my support for sure on that one. It's a tough problem.
Okay, thank you, Jessica. We have one last one. Any chance we can access the slides after the webinar? Yes, we will be sharing the recording and the slides after this call, so expect it in your email within this week. With that, I think that's all the time we have. Thank you again, everybody, for joining. Once I just want to highlight that we have two upcoming events. Going to be in AMCA tomorrow and ARMA Ontario Info Connect in May. So see you guys there. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out after the webinar. We have a contact form in our website. Other than that, thank you and have a good day.